Hi everyone, Louis here from the Creativity Club at the University of Kentucky. We're starting a new YouTube video series called Highlighting the Artistry in Kentucky, where we meet with many artists residing in the state of Kentucky to discuss their crafts and careers. To start this journey of meeting with many professional artists, we reached out to a Bulgarian pianist and an assistant faculty member of the University of Louisville, Dr. Anna Petrova. Dr. Petrova is an amazing musician who performs as a soloist and as a chamber musician, touring all around the nation and the world. She has been praised for her artistic, clear, and brilliant piano playing, and she is overall a delightful person to talk to. I had an amazing opportunity to sit down with Dr. Petrova to discuss musicality, her career as a performer and a teacher, and her experience as an artist residing in Kentucky. I could not have imagined a better way to spend an afternoon talking about professional musicianship than to have met Dr. Petrova. We hope you enjoyed this exclusive interview, and if you like this video and would like to support our ongoing journey, please click that like button and subscribe button to support our channel. Thank you and enjoy this extensive conversation with Dr. Petrova. So, Dr. Petrova, it is such an honor to be able to speak with you today. Before we go into discussing music and your career and what you like about Kentucky, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing this interview with me and for approaching me for this project. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Anna Petrova and I am Bulgarian and a classical pianist. I moved to the States when I was 18 years old to study in New York City at the Manhattan School of Music to study piano. I graduated from Manhattan School of Music after many years doing all of my degrees there, actually. I'm so-called an MSM baby because I got my undergrad and master's and a doctoral degree from Manhattan School of Music, and later won this job at the University of Louisville, where I'm currently the piano professor.
If you can tell us, when is the earliest recollection that you have of falling in love with music and piano as an instrument?
My father really wanted to play the piano, but his family didn't have the space for a piano, couldn't also afford to buy a piano, so he never really studied the piano. So when I was a kid, he asked if I would be interested in starting to learn the piano. And that's how I started. I thought it would be just another toy. I would be, the cool kid on the block who will have the piano, because none of my friends in the neighborhood had a piano then. And that's how I actually started my first steps in music. I was introduced to my Bulgarian piano teacher, Svetlana Kosova, who was literally my only teacher for my schooling in Bulgaria. She was my only and main teacher of piano. And suddenly, very quickly, we discovered that I was, musical or gifted, let's say, for music, that I have some talent. And I started following that path. In the beginning, it was not a love of first sight. And I like to tell that story to a lot of my students because while some of them are, they wake up in the morning and they feel like they can't live without music, that was a gradual path for me. I wanted to play, I wanted to run around the neighborhood, and I wanted to escape my grandmother, who was the one who was chaperoning me and practicing with me. And I often hid and told my friends not to tell her where I was so that I could play a little longer outside. But little by little, being more and more immersed in the world of music and meeting more of my peers who were also immersed and interested and finding themselves to becoming better and better at piano playing and at discovering all the different composers and repertoire that was written for our instrument, I started to realize that would be my musical path. I really knew that that's how I would see myself for the rest of my life as a musician. It was really discovering the world of music and the beauty and my ability to actually get better at my expression on the instrument. You see, our music and our art is something that takes a while until you feel like you can do it well. And there is a feedback loop. When you start doing it really well and we start getting better at it, you want to do it more and it's more rewarding. And sometimes we give up during that process. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult to, as a young kid, to stimulate children or to keep the interest going. But I think once you start to reap the benefits of your work and to feel like you're actually good at it, that's when people start to see themselves as, that potentially they could be doing that for the rest of their life.
The next question is, when you first told your parents that you wanted to be a pianist or a musician, what was their reaction like?
My family was very supportive. They never forced me to do something that I didn't want to do. Even in my early years when I wasn't feeling like I really wanted to practice, they never forced me to do it. They would encourage me. My grandmother would be there helping me practice and sit at the piano and do my homework, but it was never something that had to happen with lots of tears and tantrums and etc. My parents always wanted to make sure that their child would have certain future that would be financially comfortable, and sometimes in their minds music was not always the path for that. And so my father would throw ideas at me of becoming a lawyer, becoming different professions, and it was me who would question those ideas and start to try to see myself as a lawyer, and I would realize that that's not for me, that's not what I wanted to do. And I kept pursuing the career in music. So they were always supportive, but they kept questioning and making sure that I am sure mm-hmm. of my choice.
Going back to your love for the music, love for piano, were there particular pianists that you were attracted to? If you were to pick top 3 pianists in your opinion, who were they and what about them were special?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, growing up in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe, of course the Russian pianists were very easily available in recordings for us. And you have to remember that I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. And those were the times still before YouTube and the internet and all of this vast variety of information that is available nowadays. So I was growing up with a lot of Sviatoslav Richter's mm-hmm. recordings, a lot of Gilov's recordings, mm-hmm. and Evgeny Kissin. In fact, one of the earliest memories in music I have is my parents playing for me the Tchaikovsky concerto with Kissin, who was in his teens. I don't remember whether he was 16 or 13, something very, very young recording of Kissin with Karajan. Conducting for Deutsche Grammophon. The recording is made for Deutsche Grammophon, and they were playing this CD for me of this beautiful music, the Tchaikovsky concerto for piano, and I was singing it and dancing it, and then literally every night I would play it on my CD player as I was falling asleep. It was one of the pieces that I would play. And those are the musicians that I grew up with. They all have different beauties in their artistry. You know, Gillows has one of the most beautiful tones on the piano that I've ever heard. Richter has this like incredible architecture that he's able to build from the first note to the last note of the piece. You can follow his musical thought and never, wander around. Kissin has this energy, especially in that recording of the live young prodigy, right? And it was always very inspiring for me to see the picture on the CD of this young kid playing this incredibly difficult music. And since then, I have many other famous and favorite pianists who I really love now, and I show those recordings now to my students and continue to follow those artists.
Talking about favorite musicians who inspired you, we just touched upon some of the favorite pianists of yours. Were there any other musicians, broadly speaking, other instrumentalists, other genres of artists? Were there any other musicians that particularly inspire you to pursue a career in music?
To pursue a career in classical music, probably I would be most influenced by other classical musicians. As I was growing up, I used to attend master classes by a famous Russian pedagogue, Boris Romanov, who had immigrated to Macedonia. And he would hold summer classes in Ohrid, Macedonia, every summer. And I attended those for about 12 years, every summer. So those were very formative times for me, where I would meet other peers who would be very passionate about music, and we would be geeking around and talking about, the fingering and this Rachmaninoff prelude, and do you know that recording, and do you know this recording? And again, this was before the internet, so we would have to go check them out from different libraries, or make pirate CDs for each other so we can exchange those recordings. That's when I saw there is a beautiful documentary about Richter called The Enigma, which was very inspiring for me and kind of eye-opening. And I was seeing him touring around Russia talking about touring Russia with his car and playing in basically every venue that had a piano that he could offer a free recital to. So those moments were really inspiring for me as a classical musician. However, I love all kinds of music, and I follow all kinds of artists, and I still do, all genres, and it's a little bit weird because I like almost everything. So when I was growing up, again, this was the early 2000s, so I was fascinated by Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston and Christina Aguilera, and those were some of the artists that I remember inspiring me a lot. Watching, say, MTV would have a documentary about them in English, and I was still in my teens, so my English was picking up, but I wasn't fluent. So whatever I understood from that would be still very inspiring, knowing their musical path, right? Knowing Whitney Houston and what she had to go through, or Christina Aguilera and what she had to go through until she made her big name and debut, right? And she became very famous, and all the rejections that these people had to go through. That was very interesting for me as a young, aspiring musician. And those were definitely other artists that influenced me on my path.
So it's very interesting that you talked about growing up in Bulgaria and watching all of these people in different languages, right? And music is one of those art forms that is said to be a universal language because it's a language of emotion. Then the next question that has to be asked is, if you had to choose the emotional aspect of music or the intellectual side, like if you were forced to, because I think musicians, they aspire to achieve both aspects almost equally. But if you had to choose to talk about one aspect only, and you had only time to talk about one aspect, which would you choose, and why would you choose that one?
Actually, I would probably reframe your question in that I don't believe that there are two aspects. I think everything is interconnected. And I think if you want to separate them, let's say emotions from intellect, if we put emotions in one category, let's say with characters in music, you need the intellect and you need the technique to actually express those things. So technique and expression are married in my mind, and I want to convey that to all of my students as well when I teach them, is that all that we do, crafting on our instrument, becoming better craftsmanships, becoming better technicians, is for the service of the expression, right? So they can never be separate. If I want to build a beautiful, huge architectural line of a Beethoven sonata, which could be falling in the intellectual category, right? Mm-hmm. I need all of the expression, all of the technique that's going to get me there and walk me on that journey to get there, right? If I separate those two, I am stripping away my performance from the most important elements. So technique, intellect, and expression always have to go together. And we are learning the tools to become better at those elements on our instrument.
Another question that could follow up to that is, what do you think about, so like for example, one of my favorite pianists happens to be Vladimir Horowitz. And we put two different artists who play the same piece together, and they're obviously very different individuals, so they have different interpretations. What aspect or what about it do you think makes them unique? Do you think it's more of like reflection of their personal lives, or do you think it's how they feel the music, or like what do you think? That's a hard question.
It is a very hard question. First of all, Horowitz is my all-time favorite pianist, and I should have included him in that first list because I definitely grew up with a lot of recordings of Horowitz, and still to this day, and I think a lot of the great pianists have talked about that. Like I know Martha Argerich has talked about how, speaking about Horowitz, how he's unsurpassed still to this day in certain colors and balances between the hands that he can create that we haven't heard from anybody else. So what makes them unique? Well, if we break down music to its basic components of pitch, duration, we can analyze it and we can say, well, Horowitz's sound has this certain vibrations, or the wavelength of his sound is such and such, that's what makes him different. I can't really answer that with specifics, but it's their artistic language in pacing, in the color of the sound, in decisions about bringing out certain elements of the score, right? Mm-hmm. Which they find the most interesting ones, the most important ones. And we also have to remember that Horowitz's recordings of the same piece in different years will be very different, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of what they were experiencing, what they were feeling that day. Of course, everybody's personal style is affected by their personal life and personal story, right? All the pedigree of teachers that you've gone through until you create your own signature. All of the musicians that you've been in touch with, that you've played chamber music with, that you've talked about music with, or in general life, and finding some inspiring person who is not a musician, right? Outside of the music world, they can also influence you, inspire you a lot. So that is an amalgamation of everybody's personal life and style, and it's hard to say what makes them sound so unique. But those big artists, you can almost always recognize their style and their sound, right? I think sound is one of the things for me that makes people stand out.
So now we're getting into the territory of individuality as a musician and what makes them unique, like apart from others. As you're teaching different students and you see them progress and see their developments, how do you guide their individual aspect about themselves, right? Because in many classical forums, you see at least one comment about, well, this is the standardized way of playing and objectivity in music. What do you do to students, or rather, how do you teach students so that they have their own unique aspect about themselves in music that's written by potentially other people and in the world of vast resources of other artists playing the same repertoire pieces?
Well, yeah, this is a great question, and it's also very hard to answer it. Teaching, I love teaching. It definitely is part of me. It informs my playing, and my playing informs my teaching, so they're kind of indispensable. It's a huge responsibility, right? It is a stressful job in the sense that we have to inspire, we have to challenge, we have to support. Every single student will have a different path in music, and it is our job to support them, but also push them almost to their potential, right? Help them discover their best potential and their best selves in music. Developing the specific language of, let's say, every of my pianists, all of my different students, I believe that happens through the years. This is not something that necessarily happens easily in their undergrad years. I believe that it's important to build the foundation of any student, being able to incorporate even my personal interpretation as a teacher into their playing. That develops different tools in them that they later can use or reject. But it is important to be able to be malleable as a student and learn like a sponge from everyone that you are in touch with. Your piano professor, your chamber music professor, your conductor of your local orchestra, someone you'll be collaborating with, singers, other instrumentalists, and develop those tools. They're kind of like colors in your palette as an artist, right? The more you have, the more you're able to mix and create different shades and nuances, etc. So, and as you're growing up as a musician, from your high school years into your undergrad, into your master's, potentially into your doctoral studies, you are starting to incorporate all of the studies that you have been in touch with, and develop what speaks the best for you, right? So I think it is very important to learn stylistically the differences between obviously playing a Mozart sonata and playing a Liszt rhapsody, right? There are big stylistic differences, and you need to be able to understand those to incorporate them in your playing, and also maybe verbally explain to someone else what are those. That's all part of the building block of becoming your own self and developing your own signature style of playing. And of course, as teachers, it is absolutely our job to discover and guide the individual performer onto their path. So I like to challenge my students with repertoire which is perfectly fitting for them, something that I know they will excel at, and also something that is very uncomfortable for them. Say, if I have a great technically developed pianist who can play Liszt Rhapsody or a Prokofiev sonata, they should also be studying a Mozart sonata and a Chopin nocturne, and being able to mold those phrases and create a beautiful tone together with their spectacular fast passages, right? So we want to create a complete musician in our studies, and then as they do that, they are starting to figure out themselves what repertoire they want to be seen with, what feels better for them, what they feel strongly about. They are discovering their passions of composers and who they want to promote as their own, with their own concert programs, etc.
Something else that I wanted to talk to you about was you're actively concertizing not only as a soloist, but you're also concertizing as a chamber musician. They may come with different responsibilities for you as a pianist. How are they different in terms of like preparations and the overall atmosphere during the performance? or even in terms of the pieces that you perform, do you have a preference over the one over the others, or?
Yes, I have a preference in playing solo with orchestra and chamber music. Those are my two favorite things. I think it has to do with communicating and being in touch with others while on stage. I love to play solo recitals. I do them, obviously. And in those, the one upside to those is that I am completely free to experiment in the moment. One of my teachers in New York, Horacio Gutierrez, a fantastic pianist, he used to say, sometimes when you've practiced so much to play a concerto, it can be a little challenging to meet with a conductor or with an orchestra that has a very different interpretation of you from yours, right? So then you have to compromise. Whereas when we play solo recitals, at least you don't have to compromise. You can do whatever you wish and be very creative in the moment, right? On stage. In terms of preparation, obviously as a solo pianist, I think, and I don't want to offend any other musician, but we have to work really hard. Even just the whole fact of memorizing 40-minute first half and 40-minute second half of repertoire is sometimes an inhuman task. And to do that while balancing a personal life and balancing teaching life and traveling can be very challenging. I love playing chamber music and concertos with orchestra, I think for the same reason, is because I love to be passing the energy around between me and someone else on stage. This is something that really charges up my batteries and gets my creativity going, and that is one of the reasons why I have actually two main chamber music ensembles. I have a duo, the Petrova duo, and I have a trio, the Iris trio, and I perform with them a lot, but I also perform with other colleagues and at different occasions, at different festivals. Chamber music has developed me as a musician tremendously. It definitely informs my solo playing. It has developed the ability to hear different colors, and being exposed to all the different instruments that I've played with has opened up those color possibilities and sound possibilities that as a solo pianist maybe I wasn't aware of. It has, really crafted those, and I'm very thankful for that. It has also opened up different ways of pacing, because that's also something we talk about, right? We have to sometimes make compromises, or sometimes be able to embody somebody else's idea into your own playing and make it your own. And that is an invaluable tool, again, that I was talking about. I want to pass that on to my students. If you're able to sell somebody else's idea as your own and make it convincing, that's a great tool right there. And again, that's just building up your arsenal as a pianist and as a musician. And later on you can reject it, but you have that ability to do it. You can take this part from this, and you can take that pacing from that other interpretation and then make it your own.
So now we're talking about different composers, and perhaps different composers wrote more chamber music versus solo piano music and things like that. So like for example, Liszt and Chopin probably have written mostly in piano solo repertoire, right. Whereas composers like Mozart and Beethoven, they didn't really care, right? So who are some of your favorite composers in that regard?
I like to say that my favorite composer is whoever I'm playing at the moment. Because that you have to love what you do, and we as musicians on stage are kind of like actors, right? We need to present the role that we are in right now and present it in the most convincing way possible. And so I try to make myself love or discover something that I really appreciate in every score that I play in the moment. However, of course, I have, as a pianist, Rachmaninoff is one of the composers who wrote extensively for the piano. Chopin, as you mentioned, Liszt as well. Those are composers that present us with scores in which, as a pianist, you can have a lot of fun. And explore different expressions, tone colors, pacings, balance between the hands, voicing, pedaling. Those are, I can't not mention those as a solo pianist. I also love Debussy and Ravel, the two French composers who I discovered a little bit later, actually as I moved to New York. I had played some Debussy before, but not too extensively, and so I discovered his scores and I fell in love with Debussy, and all the delicacy in the texture and the different piano technique that is required to play that, which is like very light on the first escapement of the key, and a very beautiful use of pedal that is different from Chopin or Rachmaninoff. But for chamber music, the repertoire is that much more. I mean, as solo pianists, we have a lot of repertoire. One lifetime is not enough to explore all of it. But then when you add the chamber music repertoire to that, then you have 12 lifetimes.
Yeah, just about infinite amount of music that you can play. So you're currently actively touring, not just in the US, but around the world. So having been to a lot of countries and regions, was there a particular region that you were more attracted to? Was there any halls or venues that you were like, this hall is fantastic, or this hall had a really fantastic piano that I played?
Yes.
Okay.
There are two halls that come to mind. One was a little bit further in the past. It was the Concertgebouw, and I played a recital in the small concert hall, and that acoustic was so beautiful. It felt very warm and very resonant, but not too resonant, so you could do a lot of detail work with clarity. It was a beautiful acoustic, and one of the best pianos I actually played was in Tianjin, in the Performing Arts Center in Tianjin in China. A massive hall, really huge, intimidating, and then with incredibly beautiful instrument. And we as pianists are at the mercy of the instrument so often, and we don't really get to play on incredible instruments all the time. In fact, most of the time we play on so-so instruments, and it can be quite frustrating because your art is influenced by the instrument you play on. Obviously, I can be inspired by this box of wood that can produce something so beautifully that I get inspired, and then I do something on top of that, right? So it's kind of like a communication with the instrument as well all the time. And so when you have one of those, the instrument has to be serviced by an amazing technician, and you can sense that when you have that, then you feel like you are invincible, like you can do anything on the instrument and create all kinds of different colors that you weren't even aware of, because the instrument can provide them for you. So that's very exciting. Another one that I actually remember now, I did for a recording in Bremen in Germany, in the concert hall there, which is a famous venue for recordings. That was serviced by a spectacular technician, and that instrument was also amazing.
People who might be watching this might be some of your students or some of the world around music students, and they see you as an active concertizing musician, and you're touring constantly. You're giving performances on top of your teaching job. So you might be what we might call, what the music students might look up to as the epitome of a successful musician. Is there something, all the positive aspects that come with it are always great and rewarding, but was there something that you were like, this part really makes me wonder if I want to continue to perform?
First of all, you're very flattering. Thank you very much. I do like to perform. It's something that really charges my batteries, like I've talked about. It also informs my teaching, because sometimes I'm not able to explain with words to my students what exactly I mean, but then I can sit down and show them. And I think I learned a lot from my teachers in New York, who demonstrated for me, and it was important for me to have teachers like that. So I think that's where I feel comfortable teaching, is that I can show. I'm not saying this is necessary. I know many pedagogues who are incredible pedagogues and they didn't necessarily like to perform or wanted to perform. But yeah, if there is one thing that I really don't like about my life, that would be traveling. I can't wait for teleportation.
Just be able to wake up and then it's just you're just there.
Except it's supply and demand. So if we can teleport ourselves, then I'll probably be playing like 3 concerts a day. So I don't want to do that either.
Oh, I see. Something else that pops up in my head is I think every performer has some sort of a ritual to prepare themselves. I think some people have a very routine preparation that they do. Yeah. And some people, it just depends on where they are and what hall they're in, and what venues they are performing at. Is there something that you do as a routine, like preparation before the performance?
No, I actually don't do, and I purposefully try to pull myself away from any routine. Because that's a superstition that then later can creep into your confidence on stage. I did experience that as a child. So when I was 12 years old, I did this piano competition where I met one of my future teachers. That day, something happened that I thought gave me good luck. And I wanted to replicate that before every concert. And it became a nightmare. And it was like a little souvenir that I had to travel with everywhere and I had to have it on me. So I had a little bit of that stage of superstition when I was a kid and teenager. And then at some point, gradually, I broke away from it. And since then, I've really tried not to have anything like that. So, some people have it like, you gotta walk with the right foot on stage, or you gotta eat a steak the night before, or some others have to eat pasta the night before, or all kinds of different rituals. I think whatever works for you, of course, but I try to stay away as much as possible. Good night's sleep before the concert, depending on what kind of a pressure concert it is. If it's a high pressure concert, then obviously a nap before. If it's an 8 p.m. call time, go to sleep. Practice really well. That's one of the things that always going to make you feel confident, is if you have worked enough. And then, all of the actual things that really help in performance are not the day of, right? They are your preparation to that day and how much confidence you've built in your preparation for that presentation.
Now I want to get back to sort of the teaching aspect of your career. You've been teaching for quite some time as well, and a lot of people have this misconception that musicians might go into, or artists who don't really make a career, quote unquote career, out of doing what they do or performing. They then compromise to teachers, which is obviously not true, because teaching is as equally as important as performing is, as you mentioned. How was your experience as of being a faculty member at numerous institutions and experience teaching students with many different backgrounds? Because you've taught in Manhattan School of Music, you've obviously taught here at the University of Louisville. How crucial is listening in teaching music to students?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think teaching is a path that is not for everyone, and there's nothing wrong with pursuing just a performing career or pursuing a career, multifaceted career as a musician. I like teaching personally, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. How important is listening? I think listening is important in any human communication. And as I mentioned before, as a teacher, our main responsibility, I find, is to inspire, to encourage, and to challenge. Everybody's different, And I have students that I know would want to pursue sort of my path of competitions and performing and then potentially teaching. I know other students who would like to pursue a more diverse career in music, potentially doing their own entrepreneurship project in music, music administration, sound engineering, right? All kinds of, there's so many options and so many possibilities that we can do nowadays. And I think more people in the 21st century are doing multifaceted career in music rather than the older generation, which was my teachers, who had, you know, the straight path of performers and then became teachers towards, you know, a little later in their life. But listening, of course, it's important. And I've had some very inspiring teachers who taught me masterclasses. I think the master pedagogue is the one that can sense the student's potential and ability and sort of what they're trying to do, their own signature style, and enhance that. This is my goal as a teacher. I would like to get there, and hopefully I'm doing some of that already with some of my students. But I've had some master teachers who were able to sense exactly what I was trying to do as a pianist and then give me the tools to enhance that, right? That's real listening. That's real pedagogy. And not everybody, I'm not saying we have to do that with our younger students when they're 18 years old and undergrad, or, you know, they're still finding their own signature style. Maybe they're not quite ready for this kind of teaching. And then we have to go into the detail and work, of course, almost on every note, if you want to say. But when you're kind of an artist, a young artist, and you're formed and you're trying to have your own signature style, sensing that as a teacher is really valuable for me.
We were sitting in one of the concert halls at the University of Louisville. When you were growing up, developing your artistry and your musicality, did you ever dream of arriving at Louisville, Kentucky, or? Well,
it's funny that you should say that. I didn't know anything about Louisville, Kentucky until I spoke with one of my dear colleagues, Max Bragado-Darmon. He actually was the music director of the Louisville Orchestra in the 90s. And he used to speak really highly about Louisville as a city of a lot of culture, of a long history tradition in music. And when I saw this job opening at the University of Louisville a few years ago, I was very excited. I jumped on a call with Max right away, and I said, look, there's this opening, what should I do? Should I apply? He's like, of course you have to apply right away. So while I didn't know about Louisville, Kentucky, I was really pleasantly surprised when I discovered Louisville. It is a very charming city. Aside from music, it has all the offerings for a young professional. It is still very affordable. It's beautiful on the river. It has great restaurants and food and bars. And in terms of music, what's very important for me is that it can offer all of the interesting concerts and musicians that play in the big cosmopolitan cities. They actually come as well to Louisville, which is very exciting. We have a great symphony orchestra, the Louisville Orchestra. As I mentioned, they have a long tradition in classical music. They were the first American orchestra to have their own record label. So they were pioneers of contemporary music all through the 20th century and recorded some of the most prominent 20th century classical music composers. And now we have Teddy Abrams, who is the music director and conductor here, and he is another pioneer and bringing the orchestra on a completely new and exciting path. So that's great to be in touch with and to see and to play with the Louisville Orchestra and to bring my students to some of the soloists that they bring in every year. We also have the Louisville Ballet, which is a beautiful, great company. We have the opera. We have the Chamber Music Society. So the city has a lot to offer, actually, in terms of culture. And yet it's a very nice city to live in. It's not overwhelming. I always tell that to my students that New York City was very overwhelming as a teenager to go there, right? And you could potentially become just a number in someone's studio or in the city. You're very anonymous. Whereas here in Louisville, you have the breathing space to create more of your own personality, and to be someone that is noticed, right? That is not just one of the many numbers.
So more and more, and I love how you emphasized, even briefly, how important it is to support the local arts and the community art communities. And more communities around the world seem to be trying to emphasize that, breaking this idea of, in order for you to be successful as an artist, you need to go somewhere. How could current fine arts students work towards creating even stronger and even more bonded arts community in Louisville, Kentucky, but all around the world?
Oh, that's a big question. I think, as an artist, I think it's actually very important to be active in your community as you're there. Potentially going out and learning from different places. I think that's very enriching. I'm not against that. I do see a lot of master students who are coming back now to Louisville from different places. And they're bringing with them the knowledge that they've gathered from there, starting their own piano studios here in Louisville. So that's very exciting. And that's potentially something that, while living out of Louisville or out of your own community, you can then bring back to your community. That's something that is great, and I would encourage that in everybody. And in terms of building your community while you're there, oftentimes as music students or as music professionals, we get so busy, we present our art once a semester or once a year, and then we practice for the rest of the time in our homes or in the practice rooms, right? What I try to do occasionally with my students is also bring them out and reach out with small concerts, whether it's for a local church, for the retirement home organizations here, the Kentucky Refugee Ministries, we've played some concerts for them, and just be open to be in your community and speak with people about your art. I find that very interesting that a lot of people think of classical music as this elite art that is very inaccessible, that can be just found only in the concert hall. But once you bring that out of the concert hall and perform for different communities, like I've mentioned, some of these places that I've played here in Louisville, I always like to open just a little chat after the concert, speak with the audience members, or introduce the pieces that I play and talk about my personal relationship with those pieces, a little historical context, etc. People start to get more excited about concerts, and they want to start attending those concerts, or you make more friends who later you see in the supermarket, and you have a bigger community like that, a bigger network, a connection with people.
This is just for fun, but imagine if you were invited to Desert Island Discs. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a British radio program where the guest, the castaway, has to bring 8 essential recordings that they will listen to. Now, for the purpose of our interview, it doesn't have to be all 8.
Okay.
But if you had to choose some of the recordings that you would take it to a desolate place like an island, which do you have a recording that you would take? Or I've heard some different composers taking sheet music along with it. So, is there particular recordings or music pieces or any other art pieces that you would take with you?
That's interesting. Yes. So let's say the few things that come to mind that I've passionately loved are Debussy La Mer. That's a piece that I discovered on my own, and maybe because I discovered it on my own, I am in love with that piece. Currently, like I said, I love anything that I play, so I can't really say like Brahms Piano Quartet right now. That's what I'm playing, right? So I will obviously bring something like that. The Franck Violin Sonata is one of my favorite pieces also, and definitely would like to hear that more. Pop artist Sarah Bareilles. I am passionate about this woman. She's incredible, beautiful voice, beautiful songwriter. And so every day when I drive to work, I listen to her songs. Yeah, I think that's what comes to mind right away.
And lastly, if you could talk to yourself if you could see yourself in as a 9-year-old or 10-year-old, like your past self, what would you like to tell her, and what would you like to hear from her?
There's nothing that I really regret in my life, so there's nothing that I would say do differently. I think for any young person, encouraging them to be courageous and really hardworking, and brave in accepting or embracing their passions and going really 100% for them. I would have said to myself, practice hard, which is kind of what I did, but still practice, work really hard. And I actually think more than anything specific for music, building up friendships and relationships is something that is very valuable to me as a human. And that informs our art, right? Being a connected human being with others. Because ultimately what we do in music, at least for me, is communicate, right? Trying to give you something that I am feeling right now that I can find in this piece that I'm playing, and I want you to feel it with me. Or if it's not the same thing, I want you to feel something with me as I'm playing. And that is really the ultimate goal in any art form, I think, to make you feel something, perceive something inside, to move you in one way or another. Whether it's positive or negative, it can be scary, right? It can be terrorizing. That's I think what's important for anybody as they're growing up in whatever profession, is to dedicate themselves to the profession and become the best they can be, but also to not forget to continue building human relationships and friendships, and that these two are kind of connected. They are married.
Thank you so much. I could not have imagined spending for about an hour just talking about music and career with another professional like you. And we hope that we can have you one more time in the future. We'll see. So thank you for allowing us to come and talk to you for this amount of time. So
my pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, did you enjoy the conversation that I had with Dr. Petrova? We're planning to capture more interviews just like this with other artists. Click here to learn more about Dr. Petrova, and click here to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.